I knew something was wrong the moment my key didn't turn. It wasn't the usual stickiness from winter swelling. It didn't fit at all. As if the door itself had forgotten me. The porch light was on. But the cushions from the wicker chairs were gone. So was the lavender pot I'd placed by the steps. My heart thudded not in panic but in disbelief. I tried again. Then again. Each click of the metal said you don't belong here anymore. Through the front window I saw light in the hallway. Movement. And then unmistakably my mother's floral robe passing the edge of the living room. For a second I thought maybe she was visiting. Maybe something had happened. I pulled out my phone and called. My father answered calm as ever. "We changed the locks," he said. As a precaution. My breath caught. Why, there was a pause. Then he said it like it was the most logical thing in the world. "You weren't using the house right. We thought it was better this way." I stood on my own porch holding groceries I'd bought for myself. My dinner, my weekend, my space. "Mom thought you'd be relieved," he added. "She's making the guest room comfortable again." My grip tightened on the grocery bag until the milk cracked through the plastic. They had moved in. Uninvited. Without a word, I asked if they had boxed my things. "Of course," my mother said from the background. "We didn't throw anything away, we're just preserving the space better. For the family." I didn't shout, didn't cry. I stood there as a neighbor waved from across the street. I forced a smile though my hands trembled. That house was mine, on paper. And in blood, sweat, and weekends of sanding floors and painting ceilings. They thought I'd just nod and return to the guest room. To the silence I had learned to swallow. But they didn't know what I kept in my filing drawer. They didn't know the title still bore my name and only mine. I turned and walked back to my car, careful not to look back. If they wanted a house, they should have bought their own. Would you fight back or stay silent? Have you ever been erased from your own life? Where are you listening from? Share your story below. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. It hadn't changed much since I first moved back in. Same floral curtains, same chipped dresser from my childhood. A photo of my sister at prom still sat on the bookshelf, no picture of me. I'd come home after the divorce with nothing but 3 suitcases, a file folder of legal papers, and the weight of starting over at 39. I told myself it would be temporary. 6 months, maybe a year. But time has a way of folding itself around silence. By year 2, I was helping with the bills. By year 3, I was scheduling Mom's doctor appointments, picking up her prescriptions, and grocery shopping every Thursday. By year 4, I was their shadow moving through the house without taking up space. No one asked me to stay. But no one ever suggested I leave either. Mom would say things like, "You're such a blessing to us," and then later that same day, "I hope you don't think this is permanent. You'll want your own space eventually." I learned to live between those lines. To give without asking. To contribute without making noise. At night, I'd lie awake and listen to the hum of their television down the hall. It was always on too loud even when they both dozed off. I never said a word. In the mornings, I'd sip coffee alone at the edge of the kitchen island while Mom rearranged knickknacks for the 5th time. She liked order, so did I. But in her world, my order didn't count. Sometimes I caught her glancing at my planner. "What are you working on so hard?" she'd ask. I'd close it, gently smile, and say, "Just lesson plans." I was a librarian. I worked long hours at the high school, ran the annual book fair, and stayed late during exam season. But at home, that part of me seemed invisible. They never visited the school, never asked about the kids I mentored, only asked if I could grab milk on the way home. There was no malice, just a slow erosion of self. The few friends I kept would invite me out now and then. "Come to Sarah's birthday," they'd say. "You need a night away." But the truth was, I didn't know how to show up anymore. I didn't recognize myself outside of that guest room. And there was always a reason to stay. Mom wasn't feeling great. Dad needed help with taxes. The dog had a limp. One Sunday, I found myself wiping down their baseboards after breakfast. No one asked me to. It just felt easier than reading a book and pretending it wasn't quiet. That same week I saw a for sale by owner sign on a house 2 blocks away. White paint wraparound porch faded but still full of potential. I paused in front of it, coffee in hand, letting the morning light hit my face. That house looked like possibility, like breath. Still, I waited another 6 months. Saved more, ran the numbers again and again. Researched the title history. Called the owner twice before even stepping inside. When I finally did, it smelled like dust and wood polish. There was a slight sag in the hallway floor. The sink leaked, the wallpaper peeled at the corners. I loved it immediately. I didn't tell my parents until closing day. They congratulated me stiffly, like someone announcing a new haircut they didn't like but had to accept. "Are you sure you can handle it alone?" Mom's voice carried more worry than warmth. "Seems like a lot of house for one person." "It's only 2 bedrooms," I replied. "I'll manage." Dad handed me a check for $100. "A little something for paint," he said. He didn't notice my eyes welling. I didn't need their approval. But I had wanted it. That weekend I moved in. No fanfare. Just a rented truck, 2 student volunteers from school, and my old planner tucked under one arm. I kept the guest room key on my keychain anyway. Just in case. At first they visited often. Mom brought over cleaning supplies. Dad fixed the squeaky screen door. I appreciated it until it started to feel less like help and more like supervision. "You're letting the porch get cluttered. Should we store that in your garage instead? This fridge is awfully empty. Are you eating enough?" They meant well. They always did. Until one day, they asked for a copy of the house key. I paused, then handed it over. Because saying no felt ungrateful. After all, I'd lived under their roof. I owed them, didn't I? The folder was blue. Standard plastic, $2.99 at Office Depot. But inside it held everything. The inspection report, the appraisal, my teaching pension withdrawal slip, and the deed notarized and signed with my name printed in block letters, Valerie Monroe. I kept it in the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, tucked beneath old scarves and winter gloves. Because that house wasn't just mine, it was mine, because no one believed I could do it. Not after the divorce, not after 4 years in the guest room, not after becoming invisible. I didn't blame them. Not really. Even my closest friends had stopped asking when I'd get back on my feet. They assumed I was stuck. Truth was, I'd been saving. Since the day I moved back in, I funneled part of every paycheck into a separate credit union account. Cut back on dinners out, no vacations. No shopping sprees. Just school, home, and numbers on a screen. The staff at the high school didn't know. I kept to myself. They knew me as the reliable one, the librarian who stayed late, brought muffins, remembered birthdays. But after hours, I'd scroll through real estate listings, watch YouTube, plumbing tutorials, and calculate mortgage scenarios over chamomile tea. That was my ritual. My rebellion. My quiet promise to myself. The house I found wasn't perfect. That was the point. The roof needed patching. The hardwood floors were scratched and uneven. There was no dishwasher. But it had 2 bedrooms, a porch swing, and a maple tree that bloomed soft pink in April. It felt like it had been waiting for someone who understood imperfection. I toured it 3 times before making an offer. The owner, a retired teacher, reminded me of Mrs. Beckman from high school, strict but kind. She looked me over once and said, "You're not buying this for anyone else, are you?" "No," I said. "It's just for me." Her eyes softened. "Good. This place needs someone like that." I paid in cash, well, mostly. Half from savings, half from withdrawing part of my pension early. It meant fewer years of comfort later. But I couldn't wait anymore. Waiting had turned me into someone I didn't recognize. At closing, I wore a pressed white shirt and did my hair for the first time in weeks. I shook hands with the notary. Signed the pages with a pen I'd brought from home. I smiled at the real estate agent, even though she'd said twice, "Are you sure you don't want someone to come with you?" I was sure. Later that night, I walked the empty rooms barefoot. The air smelled like paint and pine cleaner. Every footstep echoed. I stood in the middle of the living room, the silence thick around me. Then I laughed. Not a loud laugh, but the kind that escaped like breath when you've been holding it too long. I unpacked one box that night. Just books. Then I sat cross-legged on the floor, opened one, and read aloud to no one. It felt like reclaiming something ancient. That first week I kept waking at 5:30, forgetting I didn't need to tiptoe. No one was waiting for coffee. No one would comment if I didn't make the bed. I played music while brushing my teeth. Cooked scrambled eggs at noon. Talked to the maple tree outside the window like it was a roommate. On Saturday, I bought a welcome mat. I didn't tell Mom until Sunday dinner. She brought over lemon cake in a disposable pan and said, "Well, it's very quaint." Dad stood in the living room, eyeing the crown molding. "Going to be a lot of work," he muttered. I nodded. "I'm looking forward to it." He didn't respond. That night, they left a canister of Lysol wipes on the counter, like I'd forget how to clean. I put it in the cabinet under the sink, next to the hammer I'd borrowed from a teacher friend, and the bag of nails I bought for hanging shelves. They didn't say much over the next few weeks, but they came by every Sunday. Brought old boxes to store in the garage, dropped off a bag of frozen soup. Gave feedback I hadn't asked for. I didn't mind at first. They were my parents. They were trying. But something shifted. One afternoon I came home and found my mother sweeping the back steps. She hadn't called, hadn't asked. "I just thought it looked dusty," she said. Then added, "You're working so hard. You don't have time for everything." The next week I found my father measuring the garage wall. "Thinking of adding shelves," he said. "I'll bring the drill next time." I looked at the wall, then at him. "I haven't decided if I want shelves," I said quietly. He frowned. "Oh, well, we'll see." Later that night I couldn't sleep. Something in my chest felt off. Like the air wasn't mine anymore. That was the first time I pulled out the folder. Held the deed in my hands. Ran my fingers over my name. Valerie Monroe. Sole owner. No cosigner. No shared responsibility. Just me. I placed it back carefully. Closed the drawer. Locked it. Just in case. It started with the curtains. The ones I'd chosen myself, linen off-white, breezy, quietly replaced by heavier damask panels. I didn't notice right away. Not until the afternoon light didn't fall the way it used to in the living room. I stood there for a full minute trying to decide if I'd forgotten how the sun moved. Then I saw the tags still attached on the hem. Mom's work. No doubt. When I asked her, she just smiled. "They were on sale," she said. "Yours were too sheer. Anyone could see in." I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Then nodded once. The next week a stack of their boxes appeared in my garage. Not the small ones they'd used to store photo albums. Big ones. Labeled in black marker, "Tools, winter clothes, pantry overflow." I hadn't said they could. But I hadn't said they couldn't either. That was the game we played where silence meant consent. They had keys. I'd given them one copy, but somehow now they had two. I told myself it was harmless. Temporary. Family helps family, Mom would say, adjusting my spice rack. Besides, it's not like you have anyone else using the space. That stung. More than it should have. I started locking the bedroom door when I wasn't home. It made no logical sense, but it felt like a boundary, small but mine. One Friday I came home late from school and found a new chair in the dining room. Dark leather, big, masculine. Dad stood next to it proudly, picked it up at the flea market. "Much better for your back than those flimsy things." He'd already thrown the old chairs on the curb. They were gone. "I liked those," I said. "They were cheap," he replied. "This has lumbar support." He meant well. They always meant well. But every item replaced was a subtraction. Every improvement chipped away at the life I'd been quietly building. The worst came one Sunday. I opened the fridge to find a full lasagna dish covered in foil, 6 bottles of prune juice, and a labeled container of tuna salad. All of my groceries were pushed to the back, some already spoiled. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice even I had food in here. She didn't even look up from the table. "Well, we've been doing the shopping. It's just more efficient this way." We. When did it become we? Later that week I noticed a stack of mail on the hallway table addressed to them. They'd updated their billing address without asking. The words sat in my throat like glass. I didn't know how to confront people who claimed to love me, who insisted everything they did was for my good. One morning I heard Dad on the phone in the kitchen talking about renovating the guest bathroom. I stood frozen on the stairs, toothbrush still in hand. Wasn't that my bathroom? Another day, I walked into the living room to find family photos on the mantel, none of them mine. Not one from my school or my college graduation or even my wedding. Just my sister's kids, their trips to Branson, my parents in Niagara Falls. When I mentioned it, Mom waved her hand. "Oh, I was just rearranging. Yours are still in the drawer somewhere." Somewhere. I started spending more time at school. Volunteering for after-hours tutoring, staying late to catalog new donations. No one questioned it. That's what Valerie did, showed up, stayed quiet, cleaned up after others. But at night I'd come home and find something else changed. New shower curtain. My shoes lined up differently. A new painting in the hallway. They weren't just visiting, they were nesting. One morning I opened my planner and saw my schedule had been moved. Not by me. Just penciled in a few things Mom said when I asked. "You forgot about your dentist appointment." It felt like being erased in my own handwriting. I stopped cooking, stopped reading in the living room, started eating dinner alone in my car in the garage before going inside. It was the only place that still smelled like me. Like my car, air freshener. Like my routine. One night I woke to find the hallway light on. Their voices low, drifting from the kitchen. I sat on the edge of my bed and realized this wasn't a home anymore, it was theirs. My name was still on the deed. But ownership wasn't in paper, it was in presence, and mine was slipping. The milk had burst through the plastic bag. It was leaking across my passenger seat, seeping into the upholstery. I didn't move, I just sat there watching it pool. My hands still on the steering wheel. My body numb. The porch light was on. My mother's SUV in the driveway. The window blinds tilted open just enough to show silhouettes inside. Someone was rearranging furniture. Mine. I stepped out slowly, bag still dripping, and climbed the porch steps. The key didn't work. Turned halfway and jammed. I tried again. And again. Nothing. Then I knocked. The door opened as if it were any other Sunday. Dad stood there calm as a grocery clerk. "We changed the locks," he said, like someone announcing a weather update. "For your safety." Behind him, the house looked different. Lived in. But not by me. My mother appeared next, wiping her hands with a dish towel. "You work too much," she said. "You weren't taking care of things. We thought this would help." I stepped back. "The deed is in my name." They didn't flinch. Dad shrugged. "We're family. It's all the same in the end." Number, it wasn't. The air smelled like their lavender detergent. Their coats hung by the door. My photos were missing from the hallway wall. "I packed your things carefully," Mom added, motioning toward a stack of boxes by the garage, as if she'd done me a favor. As if she'd cleaned up after a tenant. I didn't yell, didn't cry. Just walked to the driveway, opened my trunk, and began to load the boxes. One by one. My winter coat, my shoes. A framed photo from my wedding, now face down and chipped. They didn't offer to help. Didn't say a word, just stood on the porch like landlords watching a tenant move out. By the time I got to the last box, it was almost 9 p.m. Too late to call a friend. Too late to pretend this was anything but real. I drove to the nearest motel by the highway. The sign blinked vacancy. The clerk didn't look up when I checked in. Room 107 smelled like old air and bleach. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the alternative was sobbing into a pillow that didn't belong to me. I stayed in that room for 3 nights. A coworker texted asking if I was okay. I lied. Said I was visiting a friend in Cedar Rapids. The school library was the only space that still felt mine. I went in early, left late. Filed books. Cleaned keyboards. Wrote lesson plans for students who'd never ask who I was outside those walls. On the third night, I called the county recorder's office. Gave them the parcel number. Confirmed ownership. They emailed me a copy of the deed within minutes. There it was. Black ink. Block letters. Valerie Monroe, sole owner. I printed it at the school copier the next morning. 3 copies. One for me. One for whoever would need it next. One for whoever thought I wouldn't use it. That night, I called Camille. We hadn't spoken in months, not since she moved to Chicago. She answered on the second ring. Val, you okay? I didn't answer at first. Then I said, they moved into my house. She went quiet. Then, you want to stay with me for a while? No, I said. I want a lawyer. The lawyer's office smelled like printer paper and burnt coffee. Camille had found her Lydia Trask, late 50s sharp blazer, no-nonsense stare. She'd handled property disputes for over 2 decades. She didn't flinch when I said, my parents changed the locks on my house and moved in. She just said, do you have the deed? I pulled it from my bag, creased, slightly bent at the corners but still legible. She read it, nodded once. Okay, this is clean. Your sole title holder, no liens. No cosigners. No life estate. I blinked, so, it's mine. Fully. Lydia looked up, pen tapping lightly. Legally. Yes. Morally, that's your business. But in court, you're the only name that matters. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Over the next hour, she walked me through the process. Document the situation. Don't confront them directly. Change your mailing address. Secure your banking and identity. Then issue a formal notice to vacate. Do it by the book, she said. Because people like this, they'll weaponize your emotions if you let them. I left with a folder full of steps and something I hadn't felt in months: control. Back at school, I stayed late and printed everything Lydia requested: utility records, purchase receipts, photos of the interior before they moved in. A copy of the email I'd sent Mom last fall titled, My Space, My Terms. I'd never received a reply. I started writing things down. Every memory. Every comment. Every moment that once seemed too small to matter. She added her name to the calendar. They brought over their own silverware. He adjusted the thermostat settings. She replaced my comforter without asking. Each detail was a stitch in the larger tapestry of being erased. Meanwhile, I stayed at a short-term rental. Camille helped me find a basement unit with peeling linoleum and too many spiders. But it was mine. No one rearranged anything while I slept. Every morning I made coffee without commentary. Every night I folded my towels exactly how I liked them. No one moved them. For the first time in years, the silence felt like peace. I didn't tell my parents where I was, didn't call. Didn't write. They hadn't reached out either. Lydia sent the first formal letter 2 weeks later. Notice to vacate unauthorized occupation of private residential property. I read it 3 times before signing. It wasn't dramatic. Just deliberate. We mailed it certified. Tracked the delivery. It was signed by my father. 2 days later, I received a text from my mother. Why are you doing this? We were helping. We thought you were grateful. I didn't reply. Instead, I changed the passcode on my garage keypad. Closed my shared bank account with Dad. Rerouted my mail to the school P.O. box. There was no yelling. No screaming match. Just paperwork process and patience. Lydia called it quiet reclaiming. I called it survival. Some nights I still doubted myself. Stared at the ceiling fan and wondered if I was being cruel. If they truly meant harm. Or if this was just the shape of their love, overbearing, entitled, controlling. But then I remembered the missing photo albums. The locked door. The way my father shrugged and said, "It's all the same in the end." Number. It wasn't. That house was mine. Not because I paid for it, though I did. Not because the papers said so, though they did. But because I chose it. Built it. Pictured a life in it that finally included only me. On Friday, I returned for the first time. Just for a drive-by. The porch light was off. A single trash can on the curb. No music, no movement. I didn't get out of the car. Didn't need to. I just watched it for a while. My house. Still standing, still waiting. And for the first time, I didn't feel locked out. I felt ready. Have you ever had to reclaim something that was quietly taken from you? Tell me, did you fight for it or walk away instead? You're not alone. Where are you listening from? The letter arrived on a Monday. I had it couriered. Lydia said it was best to make it impersonal, no room for argument, no room for delay. The man who delivered it said my mother accepted it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father said nothing. The document was short, plain English. 30 days to vacate the premises. No exceptions. There were no phone calls that day, no texts. Just silence. But on Wednesday I received an envelope. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a note folded twice, written in my mother's neatest cursive. You've always been too sensitive. Houses come and go, but family doesn't. We didn't mean harm. We meant to keep things from falling apart like you did after the divorce. There was no apology, no ownership. Only revision. I sat at the dining table in the basement rental reading it over cold soup. The window rattled in the wind. The radiator hissed. I read the letter twice, then placed it back in the envelope. Filed it with the rest. Every piece of communication mattered now. At school, I began using the break room printer more often. Scanned copies of receipts, property tax bills, emails from the moving company. Camille helped me create a spreadsheet. Build a wall of facts, she said. Emotions won't win this, but documents, they don't blink. She was right. By week 2, the silence broke. My father called on a Thursday night. I let it go to voicemail. His message was calm, measured. You're being rash, Val. We didn't change the locks out of malice. You were drifting, you weren't grounded. We gave you that house in a way, we steadied you. I stared at the wall for a long time after. Hands folded. Breath even. They truly believed that. That their control had been rescue. That their occupation had been care. But I remembered the lasagna that pushed my groceries to the back. The leather chair that swallowed my kitchen light. The smell of their detergent soaking into my bedspread. They hadn't rescued me, they'd replaced me. I had 20 days left. Lydia said not to respond. Let the notice speak. Prepare for resistance, but don't engage. So I didn't. I continued my routines: work, legal prep, solo meals. I drove past the house every few days. Sometimes the blinds were closed. Sometimes the porch light was on again. Once I saw my father raking leaves in the front yard like it had always been his. But it hadn't. Not even for a second. In week 3 they called Camille. She forwarded the voicemail to me. Mom's voice brittle but composed. We're worried about her, she's isolating. We've been trying to help for years. But she's shutting us out. Camille rolled her eyes. You'd think you stole their house. I didn't answer, just kept typing. The latest draft of the official eviction filing. At night I lay awake listening to the hum of a neighbor's dishwasher through the paper-thin walls. I imagined my old sink. The creak in the hallway. The chip on the kitchen tile shaped like Iowa. I didn't miss the house. I missed me inside it. Day 28. Lydia said we could proceed to court if they refused to leave. You're doing everything right, she said. No threats, no emotion. Just action. Still something twisted in my stomach. I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted someone to say, you were right to want your own space. But they couldn't, or wouldn't. Because to do so would mean admitting they crossed a line. That their care had turned into conquest. On the morning of day 30 I received a text. We'll be out by tonight. Garage keys on the mantle. No signature. I sat still for a long time. The wind moved the curtains. The radiator ticked. Somewhere upstairs, someone dropped something heavy. But in my chest, it was just stillness. No relief, no glee. Just stillness. After work, I waited until dusk. Drove slowly, letting the sun fall behind the houses. Mine looked the same from the outside, but the porch was bare. No SUV. No trash cans. Inside, I found boxes gone. Furniture shifted slightly, and the mantel clean but for one key. I held it in my palm. Still warm. The courthouse smelled like old wood and nervous sweat. I sat on the bench outside room 302, hands tight around a copy of the deed. The same copy I'd been carrying for weeks, creased slightly damp at the corners, but still intact. It had my name in bold black letters. No co-signers, no asterisks, no one else. Lydia sat beside me, flipping through her yellow legal pad with the same ease as someone reading a grocery list. She'd done this 100 times, but I hadn't. My palms were cold, my breathing shallow. Even though I knew I had the truth on paper, in fact in memory, it still felt like I was about to be called a liar. They might not even show, Lydia murmured, eyes still scanning. But if they do, stay steady. I'll speak for you unless you're directly addressed. I nodded, though I didn't feel steady. My entire chest felt hollow and tight at the same time. But they did show. 10 minutes before the hearing, I saw them walking down the hallway like they were arriving at church. My father's tie was crooked. My mother wore the same navy cardigan she always reserved for funerals. She clutched a leather purse in both hands like a shield. They didn't acknowledge me, not a glance. Not a nod. They walked right past like I was a stranger in someone else's story. I pressed the deed tighter between my fingers. The courtroom was clinical. Bright overhead lights, cold beige walls. A tired-looking clock ticking too loudly. It felt both too big and too small for what was about to happen. The judge entered briskly, silver hair, thin-framed glasses, expression unreadable. Her robe swayed behind her like a curtain of silence. All rise. We did. My knees trembled slightly, and I hoped no one noticed. This is a civil petition for unlawful occupation of residential property, the judge announced. Case number 25. CV 0420 Monroe versus Monroe. My name echoed off the walls. My father didn't blink. My mother looked down. Lydia stood. Your Honor, Valerie Monroe is the sole legal owner of the property in question. She handed over a folder, organized, labeled, indexed. The deed. Certified mail. Utility bills. Photos of the house before and after. Miss Monroe, is that correct? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. My voice came out softer than I intended. I cleared my throat. The judge turned toward them. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, are you currently residing at this property? My father stood. Yes, we were. Do you have a signed lease from your daughter number? Did she grant you written permission to reside there? No, not in writing, he admitted. But we were helping. She wasn't using the home. The judge raised her eyebrows. Was the property deed transferred to you at any point number? So you entered the home, changed the locks, and remained in residence for over 6 months without title, lease, or legal claim. My mother finally spoke. She left. She abandoned it. We took care of it, improved it. It wasn't malicious. The word caught in my throat. Abandoned. I almost laughed. But nothing about it was funny. Lydia stepped forward. Your Honor, my client was locked out of her home. Her belongings boxed without consent. She was forced to sleep in motels and temporary rentals. We have documented evidence of possession and ownership. No transfer. No legal standing from the respondents. The judge flipped slowly through the file. Her fingers paused on one photo, my bookshelf with the books all gone. Another showed the text message, we thought this would be better for you. Then she asked me quietly, Miss Monroe, do you wish to speak? My hands gripped the bench. I stood slowly. I lived there alone for just under a year before they changed the locks. I bought that house with money I saved over years. I never gave it up. I never gave them permission to move in. The judge looked at me for a long time. Not unkindly, just deeply. Then she looked at my parents again. Intentions, even if well-meaning, do not override ownership. This is not a probate case. This is not a guardianship. This is property law. She closed the folder. This court recognizes Valerie Monroe as the sole legal owner of the residence. The respondents are ordered to vacate immediately. Failure to do so will result in enforcement via sheriff's office. No appeal will be granted on the basis of familial assumption. She struck the gavel. Sharp. Final. Not dramatic, just done. I didn't move. Neither did they. Outside, the hallway was colder than I remembered. The air conditioning kicked on like a hum of consequence. Camille was waiting by the elevator. When she saw my face, she didn't ask. She just wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "I'm proud of you." We walked to her car in silence. I looked down at my hands, still gripping the deed. Creased at the fold but whole. At Camille's apartment, she poured me wine. We sat on her balcony as dusk settled like a blanket over Des Moines. Traffic hummed below. Someone grilled meat on a patio nearby. Ordinary sounds. But I couldn't stop hearing the gavel. Over and over. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was sad, but because I felt nothing. I had expected a wave. Relief, tears, maybe anger. But all I felt was stillness, like standing in an empty room after music stops. The next morning I returned to the house. My house. The porch creaked like it remembered me. The key turned easily. Same sound, same resistance, like a breath held too long. Inside, the air was musty. The furniture rearranged, but no coats on the rack, no smell of lavender detergent, no humming of the television. I walked from room to room. Kitchen. Living room. Bedroom. They had taken their things. But their presence lingered in the indent on the sofa cushion, in the new hooks by the door, and the extra shelves Dad had installed in the garage. I paused in the hallway. One photo had been left behind me in college, beaming in a bookstore. It leaned face down behind the baseboard heater. I picked it up and held it a while. Then I made coffee. Opened all the windows. Let the March air swirl through the house, waking it up. Let it smell like me again. That afternoon I pulled out my planner. The one Mom used to tidy for me. I wrote a single note in today's box. Returned. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat at my own kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug, listening to the sound of nothing. And that silence. It was mine. I started with the porch. That first morning, after everything was final, I sat on the top step wrapped in a thick cardigan, mug of coffee in hand, and watched the sunlight edge across the wood. The porch swing still groaned when the wind caught it. But it groaned for me now. Not for anyone else. There was a small crack in the railing I hadn't noticed before. I ran my finger along it and thought, not for the first time, how many things we miss when we're surviving. That crack could have been there for months. But I hadn't seen it until I was safe. I began to fix small things. Quietly. Without announcement. The faucet in the upstairs bathroom had been dripping. I replaced the washer myself. The screen door was always slightly crooked. I rehung it. I bought paint for the kitchen trim and did one section every Saturday morning before breakfast. Slow. Methodical. Mine. Healing came in details. In remembering that I liked blueberry yogurt and hated lavender-scented dish soap. In organizing the silverware drawer exactly the way I wanted. In choosing curtains that didn't match the furniture but made me smile anyway. I stopped waiting for permission. For months my body had been trained to pause. To look over my shoulder, to explain. I didn't realize how much that pause had cost me until it was gone. Now, if I left a dish in the sink overnight, no one clucked their tongue. If I left the porch light on too long, no one fixed it. Silence became sanctuary. Not loneliness, not punishment, just peace. In May, I hosted a book club again. Just 4 women from school. We drank wine, ate too many pretzels, and stayed up past 11 laughing about a character who reminded us of our high school principal. When they left, I walked through the quiet house and felt something I hadn't in years: joy without performance. I started writing again, not essays or reports or lesson plans, but thoughts, feelings, little scenes. I kept a notebook by the bed and sometimes woke at 2 a.m. just to scribble a sentence before it faded. I forgave myself for all the times I didn't speak up, for not noticing the lines being crossed, for giving grace to people who didn't know what to do with it. I learned that silence isn't weakness, but it becomes one if we never draw a line. I didn't call my parents. I didn't block their number either. There were days I thought about reaching out. Usually when the sun came through the living room window just right, or I made a soup my mother used to make. But I didn't. And they didn't either. That absence became its own kind of answer. In late June, I took a day off work and spent it repainting the mailbox, black with silver numbers. My name underneath. Not flashy. Just final. Valerie Monroe. No title, no prefix. Just me. That summer I went to the farmer's market every Saturday. Bought Peach's fresh bread, locally made candles. I got to know the woman who sold dahlias and always gave me an extra stem for free. I started biking again. Small circles at first. Then long loops down the trail behind the school. I gave myself permission to be whole. One Sunday morning, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, the sunlight warm against my back, and whispered aloud, "I did it." Just those 3 words. They hung in the air like music. Not a declaration, a reminder. The past hadn't disappeared. It still lived in memories, in boxes in the attic, in the way my body flinched sometimes at sudden sounds. But the present was stronger. The present had roots. I planted zinnias out front. Fixed the broken fence post. Renewed my library card and started checking out 3 books at a time like I used to when I was 25. I filled the fridge with foods I loved. Bought myself fresh flowers once a week. Made pancakes on weekdays just because I could. In September, I passed the 1-year mark. 1 year since the locks, since the silence, since the shift. I baked a cake for myself, a small one. Lemon with cream cheese frosting. I didn't eat it all. But I had a slice on the porch with tea and felt more celebrated than I ever had at any birthday. A few weeks later, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short note, just 1 line. "We thought we were protecting you." No signature. No apology. Just 7 words. I folded it once and tucked it into the back of my journal. Not to reread, but to remind myself why I reclaimed my life in the first place. Protection that requires erasure is not love. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. By November, I hosted Thanksgiving. Just me, Camille, and 2 coworkers. We cooked too much food and laughed until the candles burned low. Afterward, I stood in the kitchen watching them laugh on the porch and realized this is family too. Not everyone is given the family they deserve, but we all deserve the chance to become our own beginning. My house isn't big. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't impress on the outside. But inside, it holds something sacred. It holds my breath. My name. My right to exist without justification. My house. My life. Some days the house still surprises me. I'll walk into the kitchen and notice how the morning light touches the corner of the counter just so something I never saw before. I'll hear the creak in the hallway as I pass, and instead of bracing for someone's voice, I just smile. Because it's my house now. It speaks only to me. I've learned to love the sound of the heater kicking on. The low hiss of radiators warming the room in winter. The way the windows fog just slightly when I boil water for tea. These tiny domestic things used to be background noise. Now they feel like a song only I can hear. There are moments still when memory brushes against the edges of my peace. A certain scent or a phrase someone uses at work. Sometimes I'll pass someone at the grocery store wearing my mother's perfume. And for just a second I'm back in the guest room. Invisible, accommodating, afraid of causing trouble. But the difference now, I come back to myself faster. I breathe. I remember the door that locks from the inside. I remember the key in my pocket. That more than anything is how I know I'm healing. Not because the pain never visits, but because it doesn't move in anymore. There's an oak cabinet in my dining room. It holds my grandmother's old tea set. The same one my mother once boxed without asking. I unpacked it slowly, one cup at a time, and placed each piece behind the glass. It's a quiet kind of inheritance, a reminder that legacy can be reclaimed. I light a candle each night after dinner. Not for ritual, not for romance, but because it reminds me I made it through. I made it out. And more importantly, I made something new. I host Sunday brunch now. Not every week. Just sometimes. Camille comes. A few people from work. We bring eggs, fruit, half-burnt muffins. Someone always forgets napkins, and I always forget. I don't mind. The house fills with voices. With laughter. With people who see me as I am, nothing more, nothing less. When they leave, I don't feel emptied. I feel whole. That's what healing looks like to me. Not a house without scars, but a life where those scars are acknowledged and still lived in fully. Sometimes healing is just setting the table and knowing no one will take your seat. Sometimes it's folding laundry in silence and knowing the quiet doesn't mean something's wrong. It means nothing is being taken from you anymore. Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and hardly recognize the woman staring back. Not because she's changed too much, but because for the first time in years she looks like someone who belongs fully to herself. There are still shadows some mornings, still echoes of voices I used to shrink under, but they no longer live here. They no longer live in me. And that is enough. If you've ever had to rebuild after being erased, if you've ever stood in a space that used to feel like yours and made it yours again, this story was written with you in mind. Tell me, what did you reclaim? What part of yourself came back when the noise stopped? Your voice matters. Your healing counts. Even quiet justice is still justice. Share your story below. Someone out there might need your strength to begin. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more true stories of justice, healing, and empowerment after 40. You are not alone.